So, Vladimir sat down to himself and he said, You know, I really want a state religion, but paganism definitely isn't the one for my people. So, what am I going to do? What he did was he sent emissaries to every major country he knew of and wanted them to bring back reports on each religion. And as they did, the emissaries came back to Vladimir and they told him about the religions. And so Vladimir sent out to um, representatives of each religion to come to Kiev and Rus and discuss their religion with him. He wanted to get a religion for Kiev and Rus, and to do so, he wanted to speak with the people and see how it was possible and talk to them about their religion. Well, the first religion that Vladimir considered was Islam. There's actually a long, detailed story about his desire for Islam in the primary chronicle, but it ends with a simple but great quote, really, that sums up most of Russian history, at least from the Western perspective. Um, he turned down Islam and he was quoted as saying, "These are great delights for the Russian people. We cannot do without these." And of course, he was talking about the restrictions on pork and alcohol in Islam. He was not willing to give up either. His Russian citizens were not willing to give up either. He interviewed several of the religions, and ultimately he came down to Orthodox Christianity, which made sense because we've already went over it. His grandmother, Olga, had converted, which already gave him a population of Russians that were already Orthodox Christians, and the ties with Byzantium, which had brought in Orthodox Christianity culture. And so this really made Orthodox Christianity the no-brainer choice for Vladimir. The problem is Byzantium at this time was a heavyweight. And you don't just buddy up with Byzantium if you're seen as barbarians, which at this time Byzantium did view Vladimir and Kiev and Rus as barbarians. They were not a legitimate state yet. So how do you get in with Byzantium and get them to baptize Rus, which at this time, these symbolic ceremonies of baptism and deeming a country as part of your empire, which is what it would have been, is like Byzantium, like tabs Kiev and Rus. They say, okay, now you're part of our network of countries. And so, how do you get in with a big country like that? Well, here is the story of the baptism of Rus. In September of 987 AD, Bardas Phocas proclaimed himself Emperor of Asia Minor and began marching on Constantinople. And it should be noted that at this time, Byzantium was not as strong as it had been when it was part of the whole Roman Empire. At this time, you're siphoning off Asia Minor. Bardas Phocas has already done that. And Byzantium is really in its later stages as an empire because it crumbled in like 1467, I think. It's around 1460 something when it kind of falls. And we're getting to where Byzantium is still a major player in the region, but they're losing grasp and they're losing power and status. And so Bardas Phocas, he proclaims himself Emperor of the Asia Minor region, and he starts to march on Constantinople. Basil was he was the emperor of Byzantium at this time. He sought help in repelling the attack from Bardas, and so he sent out help messages to pretty much all of his economic allies in the region, and it reached Vladimir, and he was like, "Hey, and this is Basil," and he's like, "Help, help!" Well, Vladimir said, "Okay, I will help, but in exchange, you're going to have to give me your sister's hand in marriage and baptize Rus." So as Bardas was laying siege to Abydos, which was a major port city in the region, and it was very crucial to Byzantium, as he was laying siege, Vladimir marched on Bardas, and he basically kicked his butt and repelled the attack and saved Byzantium for Basil. So, as it says, Vladimir and his army crushed Bardas and saved Constantinople. They were great liberators, and they were celebrated. Byzantium couldn't get enough of them. They loved them, and no, that's not what happened. Basil actually refused to honor his promise, saying, "Byzantium does not associate with barbarians. There's no way my sister will marry a barbarian, especially not one such as Vladimir." Well, as you can see, Vladimir would be very upset about this, and rightfully so. He had no obligation to help Byzantium at all. He had no obligation to Basil. He had no obligations to the people of Byzantium. But he helped. But he wanted, some form of payment, which who wouldn't? So Vladimir got very upset. They tried to broker a deal for a little bit. They tried to mend the rift, but it just didn't work out. And so in July of 989, Vladimir marched on Byzantium and captured Crimea and Kherson. At this point, Vladimir was serious, and he was really marching on Byzantium because he was like, hey, if you're not going to give me Orthodox Christianity that I rightfully earned, then I'll just take yours. I'll just take your empire, and then I'll just merge it with mine, and then bam, I have a Orthodox Christian nation, which is what I want. So Basil saw the error of his ways. And here's Basil again, and he's going, hey, stop that! So, in response, Basil promptly sent his sister Anna to Kherson, which is where Vladimir was at the time, to marry Vladimir, and then he baptized Russia. And so now, Russia was part of the Orthodox Christianity network. Now it's legitimized, it's in the network, it's part of the Orthodox Christianity group of empires. So, and there's the artwork for it, Vladimir and him being baptized, which when he became baptized, it baptized the whole of Kievan Rus. So what did this do? It's a nice story. It's actually one of my favorite stories in Russian history. I loved researching, I loved writing about it, I loved talking about it. But, it always boils down in history, like, what impact did this have? And so, here we go. It legitimized Rus. And you may say, well, how did it legitimize Rus? It's just a religion, right? Well, at this time, religion was a big deal in the world, and in Orthodox Christianity. And so, to prove how Rus was legitimized by this, we look at royal marriage patterns, which is something I do in my paper to prove the legitimization. There's a lot of different things that you can use to prove it, but this is probably the best evidence, is the royal marriage patterns. When you look at it, 3 of Vladimir's granddaughters became queens of European states. They became queens of France, and queens of Norway, and queens of Hungary. And these major nations, these major European nations, would not marry a royal from a barbarian state. If they're going to marry someone, it's going to be someone that's, of high noble blood. And so this proves that, they were at least seen as major players on the world stage. And also, 2 of Vladimir's grandsons married European princesses. They married a princess from Germany and a princess from the Byzantine Empire. So, you don't see these kind of royal marriage patterns again in Russia until the Romanov dynasty, and a lot of that has to do again with the Mongols. Kievan Rus was kind of chugging along and actually becoming a respectable empire. And then when the Mongols came in, all of this fell down, and there was about a 600-year period where there was no royal marriage patterns going on between Russia and the rest of the world. But at this time, when Kievan Rus was starting to build up, you had this legitimacy of the Kievan Rus Empire, and it was validated in the rest of the world. It wouldn't be again until the Romanov dynasty took over in Russia, which was around 1611, give or take. I'm going strictly off memory there, but it is about 600 years away before you will see these royal marriage patterns again. This also gave Russia access to the minds of the Orthodox Church. And, it brought in Saint Cyril and Methodius, who created this the Cyrillic alphabet. And it's the current and modern Russian alphabet. And they imported it through Bulgaria. And one thing to realize is that Kievan Rus this time was basically the modern, or the building block of three modern nations. There's currently three nations inside of Kievan Rus today. So, and Bulgaria is where they brought in, they imported Saint Cyril and Methodius brought in this Cyrillic alphabet. Saint Theodosius, who was part of the Kievan cave monastery with Saint Antonius and Saint Sergius, Saint Theodosius brought in the Studite rule, which really brought in academia. It brought in writing and translation. So a lot of these Western texts that had, symbolized like the mainly Aristotelian thought at this time. It brought in these texts that started to be translated into Russian and the language of the Russian people. And so it really brought in this academia at the time and writing. And writing is a major component because Vladimir saw the need for writing for a culture. And so he brought in all of these rules. And Ben Eklof wrote a good book on schooling, and so did George Venedesky. They both wrote about these schools, these elite schools that Vladimir brought in to educate the future leaders of Russia. And they were similar to those that Charlemagne set up in his empire. They were mainly sent to serve the future leaders of Russia. You showed promise. You went to these schools and you learned you learned writing and reading and things like that would serve you in prolonging this empire, which is vital to any empire. And lastly, it brought in the first ever Russian law code, Russkaya Pravda, which was both good and bad. The good is it set up a bureaucracy in Russia and an actual government system. The bad is it established serfdom, which is a topic I will talk about next time, as we talk about serfdom, its evolution, and then ultimately the 100 years of revolution that it spawned in Russia. Because it did. It spawned about a 100-year window where you had 180 peasant revolts and 3 revolutions. And so it ultimately ended with the Bolshevik Revolution and the nobility basically being hung and murdered and savagely just disposed of. But that is Vladimir and his contributions. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.